Hello and welcome to the 14 Going on 41 podcast. I'm Arvind and joining me is my lovely co-host, the world schooling, Gen Z speaking, ocean loving, trash talking, can't do nothing, Kiara Arana.
Thank you. I am the 14 half of this crazy duo, which you normally say, but today you missed out. Anyway, we're back and we're here to have another conversation with someone who has taken a road less traveled and who's really changed the game.
That's right. I mean, he's not just taken the road less traveled. It's like he was on cruise control in a Merc and decided to get off and say, let me just build a whole new road that doesn't exist for other people.
It's crazy if you think about it. I mean, he pressed pause on having an elite degree at a very prestigious business school to press play on changing lives.
It's exactly what he's done. And in this pause play analogy, I'm just like, it's not as simple as just deciding to change your OTT subscription. What he's done is really impressive.
Yeah, but I have another analogy. Sorry. I know
Okay.
But imagine if Harry Potter had left Hogwarts in year 5.
Didn't he actually leave Hogwarts?
No, not because he was almost expelled with the whole Dementor thing. But what if he had chosen to start his own school for, witches and wizards that never got their Hogwarts letter? Some of them are 14 years old and still waiting.
You may let or may not come, Kiara, but I think that's a great analogy. And Dumbledore would totally have approved because if you think about it, he's a noble kind of guy. He would have liked it. But I do think the movie might have turned out differently. So you talked about Dementors before. I think it would have taken on a whole new meaning. So instead of these dark, glidey, ghost-like figures, I think Harry would have to put together a team of teachers and they would be Dementors.
Oh, God. Well,
Get it?
it is slightly funny, but you're in the mood for wordplay. I'm in the mood for teaching you a new word of the day.
Okay.
It's
Does that mean
time
it's
for
time for
our Gen Z word of the day. So today's word is glow up.
Okay, it has to do something with like lighting and selfies where your photo just completely...
No, not everything as teenagers do is related to selfies and to Instagram. Try again.
Sure. I will remember that the next time you're doom scrolling on your phone and record a video. Glow up, glow up.
Okay, I feel like we're going to be here forever if you try and guess some more. So I'm just going to give you a hint, okay? I'll give you an example. Akshay had a huge glow up when he left his MBA to start his own movement.
Glow up. Okay. Left his own. It's kind of like grow up. Like Akshay grew up and like he just figured out what to do with, like he leveled up. Glow up is still like level up.
I'd say that glow up is more like a full transformation, 180-degree spin.
Okay. So yeah, just complete twist from, I'm not going to study, but I'm actually going to help everyone else and get off this corporate rat race.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so that's a glow up. I get it. And what Akshay did was a big risk, but you know what they say, glow big or glow home.
You know what I say? When the glowing gets tough, the tough get glowing.
I'm very proud of that pun, Kiara. That was glorious.
Gloria is my favorite character on Modern Family.
My favorite character is Phil, and I think I've had enough of a fill of this segment. So let's move on and bring Akshay on. We are back, and I'm so thrilled to have someone who is extremely accomplished. So much so that I think our podcast doesn't have enough space to fit in everything you've done, Akshay. But you were the Social Entrepreneur of the Year last year, presented by the Schwab Foundation. You were at Davos at the World Economic Forum, where they actually gave you this award. You're also an IIT Bombay Young Alumnus Award winner, an Ashoka Fellowship recipient. But more than all of that, you set up Avanti Fellows. You dropped out of Harvard Business School to do that. And along the way, you've taught over 50,000 kids each year that you're impacting. Over 1 million are actually recipients of all the material you're creating. And you're impacting lives at scale. I mean, it's just amazing to have you here and to actually hear your story.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're very excited. And this podcast is all about those fork in the road moments. And Arvind mentioned one of them. It's a huge one. Dropping out of Harvard Business School. I mean, like, that's the best business school in the world.
One sec. He went to Harvard, not Stanford, Kiara. But it's a pretty good one. It's one of the best ones in Boston, I hear. But no, jokes aside.
Yeah.
How did you go from like dropping out of that and then decide to actually do something with Avanti Fellows and actually go ahead and say, I want to focus on education for the underprivileged, higher education, and just give up the path you were on?
I think very slowly. I feel like I would love for it have to been like a moment in time. I mean, there was a moment in time when I decided, but I do think so much of, I think, the decisions I took, and I'm sure this will be true for many people who you talk to, it's also a process of realizing who you really are and what you really value. Because I think most of my childhood and at least my late teens, early 20s were kind of hijacked by this desire to just accomplish, right? So we were given a framework. I think it started from school, where you were told that you're worthy if you get certain number of marks, you're unworthy if you get certain set of marks, and everything in the way that I measured my life was based on frameworks that other people gave me. And I think it took a fair amount of time, some fiscal and financial independence, some perspective to actually figure out what is the frame I want to live my own life in. Specifically to Avanti, I think, some of this thinking, I think, started when I was at IIT. It doesn't seem like much, but when I used to play basketball, my team captain was this kid called Charan. Was in my department, came from rural Rajasthan. He was a very good friend of mine.
So one sec, did you not captain the team? Because I always felt like you were the one rallying the troop. Everyone was.
I
like,
was eventually, but after Charan, his 4-year course, he left 1 year before me, so I filled his shoes. But I think just that friendship was, I think, the first person I'd been really friends with who wasn't urban elite, right, in some form. And I think it really gave me some perspective around, like what merit means, what accomplishment means, how talent is spread. And it just didn't sit right. I think there was some that almost no one like that was at IIT. And Arvind will remember this, but I think during our time there, there's a big question around the IITs being like the great Indian pit stop, and most of us showing up there using that, essentially publicly funded 4 or 5 year education, and then, using that to enrich ourselves in some ways. I think my conclusion from that whole process of conversation, I mean, I was very young, was that there was actually nothing wrong with people using that education to do whatever on earth they wanted to do. But the problem was really in representation, that, that very few people had access to this. And it was getting harder. And I think HBS was interesting for a variety of reasons. I think leading up to that, I had worked at BCG. Then while at BCG, I got seconded to the World Food Program and then Save the Children, and I'd spent some time in large nonprofits. And I think by the time I got to HBS, I think what was very clear to me was that I had no interest in pursuing a career where I had very limited control over what I was doing. Like, I just didn't want to be like focusing on getting 1s or 2s or 3s on evaluations and then kind of growing in a way where, it was entirely based on how I performed on someone else's metrics.
You didn't want to get into one more framework that someone's prescribed for you. Correct.
Right. I think that was clear. I think the other was I did want to do something that was impactful for society at large, and that was important. I think I was pretty convinced actually when I came to HBS that I did not want to work at a nonprofit, because I'd spent some time at large nonprofits and they have a lot going for them, but also they have the same bureaucracy and structural like rigidity. For me, that wasn't what I wanted to do. So Avanti actually started very funnily because HBS used to have this $2,000 grant they would give us from the money we paid them. They would give us a $2,000 grant to prepare for a business plan competition.
In fairness, you were giving them a bit more money than that. So 2,000 was a bit of chump change.
And I think my realization was, look, I've been thinking about doing something like this for a long while. I can probably start a nonprofit in $2,000, right? And we kind of just started in that way, in a very like lackadaisical way. It wasn't really, the intent initially wasn't for me to do it full time. We thought we would do it as a student volunteer collective across the IITs. And then I left HBS not to do Avanti. I left HBS on a leave of absence because I'd gotten involved with a medical device startup while I was there, and it was doing well, and I wouldn't have vested shares, right? So I left for very traditional reasons in some ways, that let me go and try and do this. And HeartFlow, which is a company I joined, was also like, it's the most accurate test for heart disease in the world. So it was saving lives, right? So it seemed like a somewhat more adjacent space, which is still commercial, still played to what I had spent time learning.
It hit VC, it hit tech, it hit that, but it also was not hedge fund.
Correct.
You're doing something real that's impacting.
And I think similar to Arvind for you, right? Like I think it was adjacent. It took advantage of what I thought I knew how to do, and also did not have me reckon with the fact that as to what would it mean economically, etc. Right? It was quite an easy zag, right? Not a very extreme zag. And I did that for 3.5 years, right? While Avanti was growing in India slowly. And I think the fork in the road for me was really, we'd gotten to had done reasonably well. I was 3 years into my 5 years of leave of absence.
That is ended, right? I mean, you can't go back now.
No, I cannot anymore.
Okay.
Yeah. They told me categorically, finally. And much to my mother's disappointment. But I think I was, life had gotten very comfortable and things were kind of in cruise control. Like I just had to keep doing the same thing. And then the next step would be to get a mortgage and then get a home and then, settle down in the Bay Area. And meanwhile, I think things at Avanti were very frantic and exciting. And I think for me, the big moment was really that, we got our first year of results, right? So what we do is we help identify high ability young people from public school systems, and then we help them prepare for entrance exams. At that time, it was primarily the IIT JEE or the engineering entrance exam. And we had our first batch kind of graduate in 2013. And all of a sudden, I could see for real that we had like 20 children going to the IITs. And, these were all like farmers' kids, first generation learners. And it kind of worked. And it worked very scrappily. Like we barely had money. We were borrowing content. We were convincing people to teach the kids for free. And I think that fork in the road was literally like driving down, the US 101 and like on my 40-minute commute to Redwood City and like really thinking about this, questions to, I was actually on the road, which is, do I take the Redwood City exit or do I get the hell out of here? And I think the voice in my head became very clearly that, coming back to India was the more exciting answer. And then the work kind of pulls you in, right? I think one of my reflections on this is I don't think I made very intellectually thought through choices. I made very instinctive choices, and then some of them worked and some of them didn't. But the ones that worked were often the ones that were closer to who I was, right? So for me, they were the right choices.
Almost feels like very, Swadesh inspired types come back, make impact. But actually, before we go ahead, I know Kiara and I were talking before, and she was wondering about all of this is later in life, right?
Yeah. Even about your childhood, I think we were talking before we started recording. It seems like you had a very interesting childhood. I have this question I love to ask to all of our guests, which is, when you were 14, what did you dream of doing? Was it like something entrepreneurial, something with education? What was your vision?
No, and in preparing for this, I was thinking about this question.
Just for the record, we do send our guests some questions in advance. Some of them, like Akshay, actually prepare. Some of them actually just show up and talk. So those are harder. So appreciate you thinking about this in your drive over, right? Isn't that when you thought about it? It feels like a lot of your thinking happens on the road.
Yeah. No, and also I think I was excited to do this because I just, like, I've realized that my jam in life is I really love spending time with very, very like motivated young people. Like this is just the thing I love doing the most in the world. So if not because of Arvind.
I only fit 1/3 of that description. Maybe. I don't know if it's motivated, young or person. So we can decide that later.
But when I was 14, it's also shocking to me how little we knew about the world. I don't think I even considered like entrepreneurship. It wasn't even like in the considerations. I don't
even think I knew what it meant, right?
Yeah. Like business karenge was like, it was just a very like weird time. This is also like 90s India. So like there really wasn't much going on. And I grew up in the Navy, right? So for me, everything, the whole world that I knew was the armed forces. It's all I really knew. So I was obsessed with being an Air Force pilot. And I was obsessed with planes. And I had been for, I think, the majority of my teenage years. Now I think I was kind of just obsessed with being like the hero of my own story in some ways. And like I said earlier, I don't know if I felt like I had the permission to have meaningful personal ambitions. Right? Like I felt like in that frame that we were in the kinds of schools we went to, I think it was all driven by accomplishment and achievement and not by ambition. And I think those are very different things.
Say more, because it's funny you said that. It made me think, because Air Force pilot sounds to me like a meaningful personal ambition, but at the same time, getting into an engineering college quite doesn't tie into that. So like, how did that distinction come, and at what point did that come? And just curious to double click on.
Well, I think that's a good question. I feel like there was a difference between the dreams one has for themselves versus what one wants to achieve versus what is ambition, right? And I think the Air Force pilot thing was one of the careers I knew about. It seemed like the most exciting one. What I was actually perhaps more interested in was the actual planes than flying them. I also had the world's worst sense of direction. So thank goodness I was not.
You should meet my mom.
She does listen to this podcast, Kiara. But no, I hear you. On your direction's better than mine. I think you showed up relatively on time today. So
No, it's really bad. I always get lost. And imagine putting me into like an F-16 and putting me in the air. This would not be a good idea, I think, for anyone. But we were all told we were very middle class. And the only pathway to not being irrelevant was to be highly accomplished, right? In a very narrow way. So I think the permission to even sit and think about who do I want to become and what do I, and it's true, it's no one's fault. It's just, I think, the zeitgeist we grew up in. Yeah. So I think I was very just driven by like, I want to come first or second in class. And like, if I don't come first in class, my mother will be disappointed. And
it's also a generational thing. Like you said, 90s India, I mean, liberalization just starting to kick in. People are just used to thinking, hey, I need a job, I need stability. Like you said, middle class or not, people are just trying to figure out, how do you just get a job, either a government job or a doctor or an engineer, and just survive in, post-colonial India for a long time had a bit of that. And I think we were lucky to have parents who were supportive over time and to also let us explore our own paths. But like you said, I don't think it's anyone's fault. It's just the society we grew up in.
Are young people the same way now?
I think it's become less about the grades. And I know I've heard a lot of people talk about like when they were young, there were different paths. You can become a doctor, an engineer, or if you're, business was one. And then there was, at least for college, there was like the arts. I think now there are a lot more like unconventional people are thinking of the crazy things that we can do. And I have one friend, she knows before that she wanted to be a doctor. Now she's like, I want to be someone who's researching and how to make vaccines when I grow older. And she's trying to figure out what she can do at 14 or 13 to like achieve that path when she grows older. So I think it's different.
Kids today, man, like I just on this podcast, I've learned so much from Kiara, and I just feel like, I think generations generally get smarter, access to information, all of that comes through. But like the way kids today think is just quite just a level up from what.
No, it's inspiring, right? Like it's so good for the world that people have, like the young people especially, think this way, right? Like I think it's easy to kind of view, like we're all getting to be old fogies, right? I feel like to view.
Speak for yourself.
Not Arvind.
41 years young.
Yeah, not Arvind, me. But I think it's very easy to be cynical about the next generation. But within that is so much hope, right? In the sense that like they're like most of you, and this is true, I think, across the income spectrum, across like the aspirations of young people are not the aspirations of the generation before, which is, I think, very desirable. I don't know if you answered your question though. I think we have went in circles.
That's the beauty of this conversation, right? And it's
we go off track a lot, but that's the theme of the podcast. Going off track.
But I was going to tie what you said back to Avanti, right? Because you talked about aspirations of young people, aspirations of what you've seen, etc. I'd love to hear just some of the success stories from Avanti, right? Just what's come out of that, right?
And I think there's many forms of success, which I think is what makes me the happiest. So there's obviously the conventional, stuff, which is we had kids who went to IIT, who started companies. We had kids one child who went to MIT on a full ride. Like he's now raised a bunch of money, Ayush. The funniest thing that happened recently is I opened the Hindustan Times and it said Indian origin CEO has whatever picturesque wedding in 2000-year-old cathedral, something. And there are many of these stories. Right?
Yeah.
And I saw who it was. It was my student Ayush. And Ayush grew up like very low income in Kanpur. His father is a mechanic. Mother works in the CRPF. Went to MIT on a full ride, right? And I sent this to all the people who supported him because he came to us for test prep, but he eventually got supported by the Red Pen in Mumbai who helped him with his college applications. And I was like, this is so funny and so different from the coverage he had when in 2014, where the headline was, mechanic's son qualifies to full ride to MIT. And his face, and I think you start to see part of it is the economics, and the economics change in many ways. But I think so much of our work is about caste and class mobility. And I think that is true class mobility, right? To go from the narrative about you being how you overcome adversity and, to now being aspirationally cool.
Yeah.
In every way, economically and socially. I think there's I think several kids who've of course done really, really well and work at Microsoft and Google. And I think there's other forms of success as well where, like in our very first batch, and this also talks to, I think, many of the blind spot. I really feel like I have started to become an educator only in the last 4 or 5 years, because we've also learned on the go, right? Like I was 26 when we started Avanti. I was 29, 30 when I moved to India. We came from like these backgrounds which have nothing to do with teaching, learning, or young people, right? So in the like our first batch, we work in this rural residential school system called the Navodaya Vidyalayas. And in the first batch, there were 17 boys and 3 girls. And everyone forgot that there were 3 girls, right? Like entirely. In our general collective consciousness, you tend to forget, right? Yeah. And also because, how poorly our program was designed for gender, that, they were obviously there's 17 boys studying together and there's 3 girls studying together in 2 different hostels, right? Yeah. Those girls really struggled. Yeah. Yeah. And of the 20, the 17 boys all got into an IIT or an NIT and the 3 girls didn't. And I think the nicest interactions I had was with Ela, because she reached out, she would move back. One of these girls, when she came to Mumbai, and then she wrote to me saying, I'm here, would love to meet. And at that time, I was doing these conversations with our alumni about, like reflecting 10 years, 15, because these guys graduated in 2013, right? So it's 20, like, it's almost like in 20, my God, yeah. 11 years, 12 years later, on like, what was that experience like? And I think because that's a good mirror to how to get better, right? Yeah. Like, how do you look back on your school is a pretty good measure of how your school was. And this kid was amazing, right? Because she like came to our program. She's from rural Bihar, didn't clear the JEE. Largely, I think it was our fault. Like a bunch of boys teaching a bunch of boys for an engineering exam, right? So then had to go back to Bihar, and her parents were very conservative. And because she didn't get into engineering college, they refused to let her go to Delhi University, where she had gotten into like a pretty high-end college in Delhi. And they made her go and do her BSc in rural Bihar, right? And like, we will not let you leave. And this kid basically like persisted through that for 3 years and qualified the ISI exam, which is the Indian Statistical Institution, which is actually harder to get in than the IITs for your masters, right? Statistically speaking. Qualified, went to ISI, now is doing extremely well, right? So I think in many ways that these stories of kids who we failed but still succeeded. And of course, if we had not picked her, like she wouldn't have known that she was academically capable. So I think we did that right. But I think especially when we do a lot of cherry picking, right? Principally in our program, like we would out of 100,000 kids, we would end up working meaningfully with maybe 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 children. We're trying to make that number larger. Yeah. But I think the magic of whether you want to call it selecting or cherry picking or identifying, right, is that I think once you're identified, especially if you're a girl who's identified, and someone comes and tells you for the first time in your life that, hey, you're top decile at something, could be anything, right? It just changes how you see your own life. And then whether people like us do a good job, bad job, horrible job, as in this case.
I think you underestimate her. I know you'd like to self-deprecate a bit, but the fact that she reached out to you when she came back, the fact that even if she didn't get in, but had the confidence of being selected and then had the courage to say, you know what, I'll actually study for ISI, and then is actually coming back and reaching out to you. And I know you personally, right? I think I wouldn't underestimate the impact you've had, but also then the constant learning and relearning and recognition that, okay, how do we get better? How do we make this program better across an entire spectrum, right? You've talked about being, caste mobility. You've talked about, class mobility. And how do you try and make sure that people across women, especially when we went to IIT, it was primarily a lot of boys and not many girls in what you're doing. But what you're doing to even be aware of that and try to change that is impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, you're having such a big impact on not just these kids. While we were doing research, I saw somewhere that you've said this, you have this quote that says, when you're helping a kid, it's not just the kid you're helping generations of their family, and you're uplifting a whole generation. I think that you've impacted thousands of kids, but you've also impacted their generations and family. That's amazing.
No, thank you. And I think that is actually truly the work. And I think what I feel like the best articulation of our work over time has become is that generational switch. And Arvind, to your point, you're right, which is to say that, I think there's many tiers of this, right? One is, can you shift mindsets? And actually, it's in these matters, it's very quick. Like the moment a family realizes that they have a special child, right? And I think not to self-deprecate again, but I think right now it's still a very narrow definition. which is like mathematically talented kids.
Mm.
To this point, we are trying to add more. But, like once you've identified, especially for a girl, you tell a family that, hey, this girl's super talented. Like, she's not just like good, she's like extraordinary. I think how families treat their children changes. I think how families see their own lives and their aspirations change. And I think that helps in every way, right? Because then the parents work harder. They try and earn more money. They try and put their kids through better schools.
I'm a lot more curious on how the higher education coaching happens and all of what does the future look like?
So what we do now is, if there is a college seat, there is an exam in India.
Yeah.
Right?
Of course.
And
how else would you select people?
Yeah, how else do you know a person's worth but by their score on an exam, right?
But in fairness, that's also the challenge of the scale and numbers in the country.
There is none of these exams which has an acceptance rate north of 10%. So it's crazy because 2.5 crore kids, like 25 million kids. And then if you add up the total capacity of technical course colleges and so on and so forth, that will be out of the 25 million, 1 million kids can get into something. So just by design, you add nursing, you add, pharmacy, you add legal law degrees, you add engineering, you have science research degrees, anything which is mildly linked to professional pathways. By design has a 25:1 acceptance rate. And then, of course, as you get to elite colleges, it gets even harder.
Yeah.
So which means that there's essentially an exam children need to prepare for, no matter what it is. It's, I think now by whatever estimates, somewhere in the $10 to $15 billion industry preparing kids for this. But the interesting thing is there's a $15 billion industry preparing 10% of the population for these exams. Right? So, and then you have 90% of this population. So I think as long as, let's say, if Avanti and others don't do their work, then it's actually still an okay equation. It's about 1 million spots for about 2.5 million kids.
This is context, Akshay. When we did this first episode, we did a lot of math, and Kiara has prevented me from doing any math questions. So as you're saying all this, I think some of this is going above our head, especially the numbers. So we won't ask you ratio and percentages, but I'm just saying slow it down a little bit.
But you can ask me questions though.
So I'm very curious about the work that you do as Avanti, but I'm also curious about some of the advice that you'd have to give kids my age. So you talked about you worked at the World Food Program, at Save the Children. You're doing such amazing work with Avanti. What advice would you give to someone my age who's looking to go down that route of, they want to make a meaningful impact in the world. They want to make a difference. They want to go down that social impact route.
Start as early as you can.
Yeah.
Right. I think so our work right now is primarily tutoring kids for exams. And I think there's two categories of kids really, right? I think there's kids who have, by virtue of income, exposure, do not need to worry about economic mobility.
Yeah.
I think there's for children like yourself and for kids who are not worried about, too worried about, economic mobility. I think young people are even less worried about money than the generation before and the generation before. Not because they have too much, because they really care more about the world. And there are many, many more problems that are now solvable. And I think technology gets better every generation, every year, now every month, right, with AI. Not Arvind.
So you've heard the joke too.
Yes. But
you do say it's getting more solvable, but some of these problems are also more compounded than they were 10 years. Like trying to solve climate change today versus if you tried to solve it 30 years ago.
Yeah. And I think I'm a little overtly optimistic, I think sometimes. But I feel like, yes, but I think your ability to do something about it as a young person is definitely higher.
Yeah.
The problem might be bigger and more compounded, but your ability to do something about it as a young person is stupendously high. Like organizing online is so fast, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen that in recent movements, all over the world, right? So you can organize, you can band together, you don't have to be in the same place, you don't even have to be in the same country, you can mobilize money, you can actually do things, like build things really, really fast. Like for you to find someone who has very strong technical skills and you can do a lot more of the research, you can, bring in a much more sociological perspective to it. Like all of this is very easy. You don't even need the structure of colleges and universities really to do many of these things. And what you do doesn't have to actually even work. but it's a lot better to spend, 5 or 6 or 7 years of your life learning to solve a real problem than learning in theory about how many problems there are.
Sounds like a bit of a validation of your decision to drop out of school, Kiara.
Yeah, before this episode, we were discussing, because both you and Arvind are alumni of IIT, but we're both alumni of the Dropout Club, essentially.
Yeah, Harvard's a little different from 5th grade.
Yeah, I dropped out of middle school, so.
See, the world's getting better. No, I think on dropping out, I feel like it's not the right decision for most people.
Yeah.
I think it's the right decision if you do it for the right reasons. And I think it's a very personal decision, right?
Of course, yeah.
I think schools are being pressured also increasingly to change. Because I think young people are voting with their feet, and if not with their feet, then with their attention. Which is that if you're just not going to provide an environment for me where I can do what I care to do, then I'm just not going to bother. Which culturally has shifted in India, right? It wasn't the case when we were growing up. It was not an option to not bother.
Just listen to what your teacher says or your parents say. And
yeah, it was very different culture. It's very different, level of respect. And I'm not saying this as that was a good thing. I'm saying it's just fundamentally very different, right? Arvind and I probably became turned into these not very, I don't know what the right word is, but to not respect authority.
Irreverence,
yeah. We arrived at irreverence later in life.
That is very true. Although we are very respectful of the elders in our life, as you should be, Kiara, of the 41-year-old co-host you have. So just trying to get her to roast me a little less. But I know what you mean. I think more than the respect with this younger generation, right? I think there was almost this fear of doing something different because there was a bit of authority, but there was also a bit of, I don't know any better, and so I will follow this. Whereas I just think younger folks today are just more aware, more smarter, able to make those choices and say, yeah, there might be an unconventional path. And to your point, it's so much easier to do now than it was for us, right? We didn't have internet, right? We had newspapers and organizing.
Letters. We used to write letters to pen pals. It was a thing, necessity.
And by letters, it was sentences, like envelopes, not just like A, B, C, D. We used to write these things in something called an envelope. We used to mail it to people. Did you actually have a pen pal, Akshay?
I think one. Yeah, briefly.
Okay. Not like me who wrote letters to himself. Anyway, sorry.
I've also heard some other stories from your college days. I don't know, again, if you want me to bring this up, but I've heard something about jam competitions as well between you two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a terrible excuse to let us just talk nonsense for hours on end, and people clapped.
Which is why we're doing this podcast. I don't know if anyone's clapping or listening, but yeah, Akshay and me used to take part in these things called Just a Minute, where you just used to talk for as long as you can and interrupt each other. And we had some good runs against each other.
Yeah.
But it was the only way that IIT boys could be mildly cool.
That's not true. We also had quizzes. We had debates. We had...
What do you think, Kiara? It's who's the coolest quizzer you've met?
Arvind talks about K-pop Demon Hunter quizzes and I don't know what else, but I think IIT is pretty cool from what I've heard about it.
Yeah.
I've only introduced her to my cool friends. So all three of them.
No, it is. And I think for the reason that I think independent of whatever IIT does technically, actually IIT Bombay, I don't think we can generalize to all the IITs because, we're not elitist here at all. But I think IIT Bombay was the only one I experienced, right? I feel like had a lot of student-run clubs, a lot of agency for kids. So in some ways, not as consciously as now, let's say an IB school would do, the college was essentially run by the kids.
Yeah.
I think that's what made it amazing. And that the faculty actually went along with it. We used to still rail against them and thought they were stodgy, of course, because they were elders. But now reflecting on it, they were pretty cool. They went along with a lot of pretty insane stuff that the student body wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that's what made it, I think, the place it was and hopefully is. So they got something right. I don't know how, but they got it right.
Well, this was lovely chatting. I think I'm ready to get on with our next section, but I don't know if you had more questions, Kiara.
No. I'm ready to move on to the what if game. And we're back, and it's time to play my favorite segment, the 14 going on 41 what if game. So essentially we're going back to those fork in the road moments and we're seeing if certain things changed, where do you envision your life being So my first question is, what if you could travel back to when you were 14 years old? What advice would you give to your 14-year-old self?
I think make more friends, be less judgmental, try and learn what you can from those around you. Because I think I lost out on a lot of friendships and learning because I was very judgy.
I can see how teenagers can be judgy. I feel like me and my friends are very judgy. So yeah.
I feel that would have been great advice for me, not just at 14, but even a decade after that. I'd like to think I'm a bit better now. But
Oh, okay.
were you going to say something nice about me, Kiara?
No.
Okay, we'll let that pass. What if you sort of got into this already, right? You talked about Redwood City and thinking of the next mortgage, etc., etc. But what if you'd either completed your MBA at Harvard or had stayed back in the Bay Area and were stayed back in the US at that point in time and hadn't come back for Avanti? Where do you think you'd be today?
I'm probably working at a startup with a lot more money. But I think I would have been a very different person. I mean, Arvind and I have known each other a very long time, but I feel like the person I was at BCG versus the person I am now is very different, just fundamentally different. And now I'm a dad. I have a 5-year-old. I think I would have been my values would have been different. My outlook on the world would have been different. I think the kind of parent I am would have been different.
How so? Like, if you had to...
Because I think given, at least Arvind and I are definitely very good test takers, I think there's something in my mind which it kind of really fixates on winning the game I'm playing. Right? So the game I put myself, and this is one of the things I realized over time, is that the games I choose to play define who I become. Because everything in my being will try and win the game I'm playing, right? In the moment when I'm playing it. So like even when I was at Heartflow, like it was very clear the game you were playing, right? The game you were playing was work really hard, get the valuation up, have the company succeed. It'll generate some wealth, hopefully. Parlay that into going and, finding the next thing, either starting up on your own or doing it again. And honestly, at that point, I didn't even care what the company did beyond it was generally socially beneficial, right? So I probably wouldn't have gone and worked at a gaming company or a gambling company, right? But beyond that, literally everything was fair game that was socially beneficial. So I think I would have had hopefully some impact even in that way. But in playing those games, the parts of myself that would grow would be very different parts, like much less empathy, much, much more analytical, much more competitive. So I would just be a very different person.
Yeah.
That's impressive. I mean, it's like you would have played VC chess or, P checkers, but you're now like playing like civilization and something more complex that's going to be enduring and last the test of time with what you're doing. So I like that framing of the game.
It's good for our next segment, but I think we have a few more what if.
Okay. Yeah.
You want to push it?
Sure. I can ask another. You briefly considered going this for-profit route with Avanti, right? So
we went full on.
So you went in this for-profit route. And we didn't talk about that earlier, but I'm curious, what if that had taken off, right? What would that have meant for you today? How would that have changed outlooks?
Yeah, I also feel like it kind of didn't take off because of the decisions we kept making. So just for context, right? So when we moved back, initially we still have the nonprofit we started in 2010. We had set up these centers, in slums across Mumbai and Delhi, where we were teaching essentially without teachers. So we had essentially a peer learning based teaching methodology, and we were finding high ability, low income kids and kind of placing them into college. And it was very cost effective. It cost almost nothing. Kids could pay us like 1,000 rupees a month and it would still be profitable. So then there was a lot of excitement saying, why don't you turn this into a for-profit commercial model? So my co-founder Krishna was CEO of the for-profit. I had one leg in both ships, which itself is a problem. And that was the primary entity we ran from 2013 to almost 2019, right? And eventually, the long story short is it grew to about 50 centers, $4-5 million in revenue. Never really made much profit because we kept getting lost between trying to work with low-income kids in very hard-to-reach places and raising capital, which is a very interesting thing to try and do.
So very, very different. Right?
Yeah, it's
and one can really impact the other, right? Like,
yeah, very insane. And and I think we should keep having these. It was a very fraught. I think the first 2-3 years of starting any kind of company where you can raise money is fantastic because it's free money. Essentially, people are just betting on you doing something, and you have a lot of freedom until you run out of that money. Right. So the first 3 years were fantastic. We opened centers in Kashmir, in Kupwara, Handwara, Sopor, Chhattisgarh, Daltonganj in Jharkhand, like any place that you have not heard of, we had a center. And spending the capital to open those centers and find children was very exciting.
Yeah.
And then we had to operate them. And you start to realize then that the brass tacks of business are just very different, right? Like you have to win every contract. You have to make sure that every transaction, which in this case is a child coming to you and you charging fees, is a negotiation, right? It's a collection, at least in my mind, in that our industry is just like single negotiations, at which point then you are making the choice between someone coming in who is academically more needy, more deserving, right? But can pay less. And you give that spot to this child, or do you give the spot to a child who can pay you the full fees, whatever your fees is? And then you raise the fees by 20 or 30% because that'll get you the next round. Or do you keep your focus on trying to achieve impact? So, but let's assume that these trade-offs were not real and there was infinite philanthropic capital to fund this kind of work. And we had been, I think, a little bit more focused on one or the other, like you're just figuring it out. I think what it would have done is it would have created some cash flow and economic flexibility for us to invest in a more unrestricted way on the nonprofit and not have to rely on philanthropy. I do think, though, it would have created more distraction. Because then every year as the top line and the valuation would have gone up, the lure of spending more time on this very measurable metric, right? Which 90% of the people I meet still view success at business and success economically as the primary way to succeed at life, right? So then it's very, very alluring to kind of fall into that conversation, especially given where Arvind and I went and dropped out of, but he finished college. I think it is the common language, right, that people speak and how they view themselves and the world. So I think it not working and us having to revert back to working in the nonprofit structure was helpful for me personally.
You got back to a language you understood and a game you actually wanted to play. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense.
My next what if question is, what if you could instantly, like overnight, magically change one thing about the Indian education system? What would that one thing be?
We should spend more per child in the public education system. We spend too little. And I think a lot of things are linked to money. But I think besides that, I would decentralize it. So I think large school systems are badly run school systems anywhere in the world. So not to ask you numbers questions, but I think these are important ones. How many schools do you think even a small state manages, like Himachal Pradesh, Haryana, Maharashtra has many more? How many schools do you think the Department of Education in the state manages?
1,000.
So a small state like Haryana has 3,000. A state like Maharashtra probably manages like 15, 20,000. Mumbai in itself, in the municipality, probably manages 1,000, 1,500 schools, right?
Wow.
So to expect one IAS officer for whom this is not their only job, typically.
Yeah.
So think of them as a CEO who's there only on a 3-year term, typically 3 to 4 year term, sometimes even shorter, to come in and run a system of 3,000 schools or 5,000 or 15,000 schools. Well, it just won't happen. And I think if there was a way, and there are examples of well-run systems, right? So if you look at the IITs, it's a very extreme example.
Yeah.
Like the IITs, the IIMs, IISCs, ISIs, all these like science colleges, right? Which are small, autonomous systems. They may not be the best in the world. They have many flaws, but they are well-run. You will not dispute that they're poorly run. You take the Kendriya Vidyalayas, you take the Navodaya Vidyalayas that we work in, very well-run systems, right? By all measures. So I think is the core structural problem of if you disaggregated the system, if you funded it at a local level, like Switzerland does at the canton level, right? If you broke this up and you created more autonomy, you would get better run systems.
Yeah.
Part of the answer might be privatizing. Part of the answer might be to continue to run them. But this kind of massified, it kind of belies, I think, a very colonial view of educating the masses.
Yeah.
Which is that, how does it really matter? They're not really going to come and have our jobs. So let's just give them some education because we want basic literacy in India to be at 90%. So that we, in the UN index, when we, we don't look so bad.
Yeah, and I think it's a challenge of scale. But, as you're saying that, I think there is, if you're ever thinking of something post-Avanti, I think this is something you'd be phenomenally good at as you think about doing something in terms of looking at the entire system reform. I do think when you said all those institutions, you said IIT, IIM, ISI, I, there's a lot of I's. People always tell me you should take the I-ness out, but I don't think what they meant. But as
That
I
was
move,
very bad.
I tried. I was just thinking about it. It was just
He's really trying to get AI into it again.
Actually, that's a great segue to my next question, right? Education, learning is going to undergo a paradigm shift with AI, not me. And so, what is that implication for Avanti? Like, how are you all thinking about changing curriculum? How are you thinking about even just what to prep as you think about STEM?
Wasn't this a what if question?
What if AI makes this paradigm shift happen in the next 1 year and not the next 5? Happy? Thank you.
What if everything changes with AI? Maybe, and this is something we've been thinking about. I think it's not just AI, right? It's even the internet, because everything lags in our population.
Mm. Yeah, because internet speed connections are low and they're laggy. Sorry, go on. You set me up for it, dude. I couldn't help.
No, but I think like even internet access, broad-based internet access has only started to happen in our communities the last 4-5. Actually, COVID was the big, hockey stick there. And it's already changed. So if you ask young people, what's the primary source of learning a topic? It is now YouTube. What is the primary source of solving your doubts? It already was various apps. Now it's definitely ChatGPT, right? If you ask them what's the default way in which if you have a mental health issue, you try and deal with it. It used to be Google search. It's now become ChatGPT. This has happened. And it has happened in the lowest income, most marginalized populations also. So this has happened. I think it's not what if, it is here. And for us, actually, it's more complicated because we don't have complete control over the environments we're in. So for me to do that in a classroom, I have to convince the government, I have to convince the school principal, I have to convince my own teachers, right? And then we have to kind of arrive at an answer that kind of fits. So that has to happen. I think the second is the nature of jobs are just going to be fundamentally different when most of these kids graduate. It's already happened.
Yeah.
So we need more kids to be entrepreneurial. Not entrepreneurs, but be very entrepreneurial. We need them to be able to hustle, write better CVs, right? Because think of if you're sending out a poorly worded, badly written CV today, no matter what age you are, shame on you, right? You can, if you cannot figure that out, right? No one's going to take you seriously. Right now, people are still kind of adjusting. I think the HR departments are adjusting to the fact everything's generated by AI, but like in 3, 4, 5 years, people are going to assume you used ChatGPT to give them whatever you gave them. And then if your output is not good, it's a problem. People are going to assume that you're using AI in your college assignments. People are going to assume, I think we're going to have a huge problem with standardized testing, where like people are just going to have, like the test will have to by default be adaptive. I don't think India can keep administering non-adaptive, MCQ based papers like we do now. So there's going to be, because people are just going to rig it, right? And so we have to adjust to we've had to adjust to the post-Google world. We have to adjust to the post-AI world. There is going to be some leveling. Because the nice thing now is with this, for instance, the English language.
Yeah. It's no longer that is going to be a drawback.
Yeah. Right. So even if you're doing customer support by text, in fact, even by voice to the US, there is already very good AI voice generation. So you can have someone who's just very hardworking, intellectually with it, thoughtful, and that person is going to be more valuable than someone who can speak correct English. Right. So I think there's going to be some leveling, there's going to be some recalibration. And whenever there's chaos, I think it's an opportunity for equity as well. There's typically what happens, it creates more inequity. But I think there's also always an opportunity for creating equity. Right? So I think it's a very exciting, I think the previous question we were discussing, which is for young people, I think this is it's actually just very similar to when we were 16 or 17, right? The internet was in its very early days, right? So Arvind and my generation, the 41-year-olds today, we benefited from there being massive opportunity to do new things because the big wave in our time was the internet.
We were what people call that crossover generation, right? We were those geriatric millennials who got to see a bit of both worlds.
Or we were the first millennials, right? And typically the first of whatever generation, the early are the ones who are riding some kind of technological wave, right? So all through our lives, I think till maybe even 5 or 7 or 10 years ago, we could have literally built in 2 weeks the first of something because you had access to the internet and code, right? You guys will be able to also do that now. Like you could literally build the first, whatever, historical map of ocean, like, whatever morphology, faster than a big corporation. And you could do that, right? So like the opportunity is phenomenal, right? And I think, I know there's a lot of like doom and gloom amongst like teenagers, but I am like deeply optimistic. I think there's so much cool stuff to do. I really wish I was like younger.
That's the perfect segment to my next what if question, which is, what if you were 14 today? What direction do you see your life going in?
With my 40-year-old like life experience, if I was 14?
With 2020 hindsight.
Benjamin Button. But if I was 14 today, I would be building stuff.
Yeah.
And building is not in this very techno-utopian, like, building anything, like building communities, building collectives, building like knowledge, information, anything, right? Because the tools are just cheap. I know AI subscription plans are not expensive. They're a lot cheaper than hiring a person, right? And I think I would just be building. I'd be doing something, like creating something.
And knowing you, you'd be building movements, Akshay, because that's just truly you think bigger. Maybe I can end with one last one, which is a little offbeat. You've had a lot of interests, and I know education has been a passion. Avanti has been a passion. We talked about the path of what if you'd stayed in the US, et cetera, right? What if it wasn't Avanti, but you were doing something else that was unconventional, something else that was, your own identity and your own path? What do you think you'd be doing today?
I mean, I would like to think I would be curing meat, which is a very weird thing to do.
What's wrong with meat? Like, why does it need to be cured? Is it like it's not good? Is it like
it extracts the moisture from it and makes it tastier? But anyway, but I think that's probably not what I would do as a job. I think I just get a lot of energy from people smarter than me. I try to surround myself with people smarter, like more motivated, like more driven than me. Like I think I just thoroughly enjoy being either the least smart or the least motivated person in a room.
And we've taken some jabs at you so far, Akshay, but I can say that must be incredibly hard because you are amongst the smarter, more motivated people I know. So,
but then I'm friends with you, so that says
so
something
it's
about
exactly the opposite of what you're trying to do. But
but I think really, I think it's amazing how easy it is to find these people. Like if you are not judgmental, right? Like you'll find like. Conventionally, if you start like looking at what marks did you get, which college did you go to, it's very hard. But you will find these people in your building, like around in the streets of Mumbai. And I think I would probably still work with young people. I've realized over time I'm terrible at educating a general population. Like I have very specific kinds of young people I do well at working with. And that's what I should focus on if I was an educator, right? So I would probably help young people start businesses, start movements. I would do something in the space of helping young people succeed, if not academically, then in other ways. It's still what I really, really care to do that. And I learn a lot in the process. I like building collectives, consortiums, bringing people together, connecting them. So to succeed by helping others succeed is what I would do in some way or the other.
Amazing. Well, you seem to be doing exactly that with Avanti. Your story is great and we've really enjoyed talking to you. So thank you for that, Akshay.
We have one last segment with you and we like to call it a happiness rating game. So do you want to explain it?
Sure. I almost forgot we had another segment. I was ready to wrap up. So, Akshay has just been going on and on. I feel like we've been talking a lot with him. The conversations breezed by, but I was like, it feels like it's been a couple of hours already. So the happiness rating, Akshay, is a topic maybe we've talked about at times, or maybe at your place at a coffee shop or something, but it's something I think about very deeply today. And from the conversation we've had, it feels like it's something you do too. It is, what are the parameters that drive the greatest happiness for me? Right? And for other people around me. And so we're going to do a very simple rapid fire rate from 1 to 5. How important is this factor for your happiness? 1 being not so important, 5 being super important. Try not to go all 5s, all 1s, all 3s. I'll start with the first. How important to your happiness is wealth?
3.
Impact.
5.
Health?
4.
Friendships and connections. Don't feel pressured because Arvind's in the show.
No, 5.
How about legacy?
5.
What about fun?
1.
What? It seems like there's a lot of fun you've been having all around the way, but that's an
I
interesting.
had fun on today's episode.
Very cool. And what about fame or recognition?
Say 2, 3.
Amazing. No, I think I wasn't surprised to hear some of those answers. I've looked at some of when we were applying to business school together. I remember one of your B school applications, and so I'm not surprised with one of those answers, Akshay. But what you're doing with impact, which clearly is important to you, is phenomenal. And so, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking part in this podcast.
It was amazing hearing your story, the impact you're having on so many kids in India.
I'm excited about the impact you're going to have on the planet. So I think, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Akshay. And we're back to wrap up, Kiara. And we're going to do our takeaways from the episode we had with Akshay.
But first,
Of course, it's time for the good old days.
In the good old days.
it's growing on me, that music. I wasn't a big fan of it initially.
I love it. I love it. And I'm going to ask you a little bit, Kiara. Do you know what encyclopedias are?
Yes.
Have you ever used one?
Yes. I have my first encyclopedia from when I was 5 years old.
And you haven't, did you ever use one when you were in school for the brief time you were there, when you had to
No.
do your research?
No, never.
So in the good old days, we didn't have the internet. So when I had a school project or I had to research something, I would go to this encyclopedia, which is often labeled by alphabet. So A, B, C, D, etc.
I know how the alphabet works.
You did? Okay, because you dropped out of school. I wasn't sure.
Okay.
And so I would, as a result, try and figure out what the topic was, go and look at this encyclopedia, which would have all this information, and then use that. And then I would go to libraries. That's the other thing kids our age used to go to get like reference books and learn about information.
Cool.
But you know what? We still had it better than kids in medieval Europe.
Think you're a little bit older than that. I mean, you're not that old. What am I saying?
That may have been a Freudian slip because maybe you think I'm, from the dark ages, but
Vampire.
there you go. But in medieval Europe, kids had to memorize entire contents of a book or the equivalent of a book because the printing press hadn't been invented yet. So Gutenberg hadn't come out with it. So people would have to make their own notes. They'd have to memorize the whole thing. And so they were literally like Wikipedia in their heads.
Everyone was basically just like my cross.
Pretty much. Exactly. They were just doing like Control C, Control V, and everyone had to have an eidetic memory or they wouldn't, be able to suit up. So my cross suits reference there, folks. And with that, I think it's time to go into our takeaways.
Akshay went to Harvard. He had a very fancy job in the US. And, that's a lot of people's dream job. And I think that it's so interesting because now what he's doing is he's helping so many kids with their dreams. And he's making a difference not just in their lives, but in the way they will think, in the way their families will think, and a whole village can think. And he's changing the systems in India. And I think my biggest takeaway from that is the fulfillment he's getting out of it and helping others rather than, he could have still been in the fancy job in the US, but he's getting so much fulfillment out of just helping others. There's a quote that I have read, and it's something to the effect of, those who are the most happy are those who are helping others. So I think that's very powerful.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very good one. And I think you summed it up well because Akshay clearly seems fulfilled with what he's doing.
Yeah.
Which to me is actually an interesting juxtaposition with I've known him for so long and I've also heard him really open up about many things, right? And there were so many takeaways for me. Some of it more societal as he talked about class, caste, social mobility, inequity, how those things can move. And I think that is really powerful for me to just think about how we're not always aware of these issues and how they can have real impacts, and what can we do to make things better? And it's our duty and our responsibility to do that, right? And the other one that I really thought stood out for me is just his own evolution as an individual and what he thought was right as a kid, what he thought was fitting into a framework, how his own thought process have evolved, how he went into Harvard and said, oh, I didn't think I would be doing a not-for-profit, even though he'd done some of it before, and he ended up there. And so just realizing what was important to him, recognizing his own priorities change as he's figured things out, to a point where he knows it's a continuous journey. He knows he doesn't have all the answers, and all of that coming together, I think, is just really impressive. So I really enjoyed that episode.
So did I. I think even as a world schooler, for him, he's worked with so many kids around my age, or maybe slightly older, as they're preparing for college. And he's really got a lot of perspective, a lot of insight. There's so much to learn from him as a person. And I learned so much during this episode as well.
That's excellent. I think we should put a pause there, you think?
Yeah. We'll see everyone else next week. Until then, we talked a lot about roads this episode, especially at the start. So drive safe on the road less traveled.
Peace out, party people.